We're about now to take a look at another batch of issues, and these issues deal with technological challenges. I mentioned when we talked about abortion that this is not really driven much by technology, at least not directly. Technology has made it easier for people to do successful abortions because they use ultrasound. Initially, abortionists use ultrasound to determine whether they'd gotten all the parts of the baby out of the womb. If they don't, the mother is going to have sepsis and maybe die or become infertile. Oddly enough, though, the use of ultrasound was a determinative factor in one of the nation's greatest abortion supporters changing his mind. This man's name was Dr. Bernard Nathanson. He said as a result of seeing on the screen the moving fetus within the womb, the developing fetus, even at early stages, he came to the conclusion that what we're looking at is not a tissue, but a patient. Now, when that happened, he experienced what we will call a paradigm shift. He realized he could no longer look at abortion in the same way. This man was the founder, one of the co-founders of the National Abortion Rights Action League. He was also the presiding physician over the nation's largest abortion mill up in New York City. And he became one of the staunchest pro-life, anti-abortion advocates that we've had here in America. His movie Silent Scream depicts in a very clinical way what takes place in abortions. And it is shocking, it is gripping. I wouldn't advocate it for everyone. There's a version of it that doesn't show an actual abortion. There's a version that does. But nevertheless, this demonstrates the strength of that paradigm shift that Bernard Nathanson encountered. So we're now looking at some issues that are dependent upon technology. And there's going to be some ethical questions we're going to have to look at, such as, should we employ bioidentification, biometric indicators of who you are? Should your identity be based upon how your face looks and recognized by some national database, or your fingerprint, or your retinal scan? Should those things be used? Is that your property, or is that just part of how we can identify people? Should we clone? Should we be involved in genetic interference, gene therapy? There's quite a few. Should we implant the organs of non-humans into humans, like a baboon's heart into a human, or a pig's heart or pig's stomach into a human? Some people might say, I've had a pig stomach implanted. I got quite an appetite. But should we do those things? It's called xenotransplantation. These are all based upon our technology, aren't they? How much of a responsibility do we have for taking care of a deformed infant? With medical technology, a chance for life of worth can be given, where in the past that was not an issue at all. In other words, there was no ethical dilemma about whether or not to intervene to save the life of a child with spina bifida in the past, or respiratory ailments. This child would not survive. Basically, you just maintained the comfort of that child till the child died on its own. But today, a decision is possible because of our technology. So what kinds of things can we look at to determine how to use technology in a way that's ethical? Well, first of all, I'd like to start by showing you some things to avoid. Avoid the objections about technology that are based on current cost. If we do this often enough, it will cost less. Avoid the objection based on current efficiency. If we do this often enough, we'll get better at it. Avoid objections based solely on current risk. The more we know, and even we get research based by doing the action, the risk will go down. Avoid objections based on the statement, we shouldn't play God. Because how do you define that? Any attempt to alter the course of natural events can be condemned by this sentiment. So when you see an accident on the road and you call for an ambulance, are you playing God? You're providing some intervention. You would want to provide it for you, yes, but you're providing some intervention that will change the natural course of events. or resuscitate a swimmer, or take an antibiotic. At some point in time, someone might have thought this was just going too far. Let that person go. It's their time. So it's too squishy, isn't it? This idea we shouldn't play God. It's not to say there's not some value in that, but standing on its own, it's hard to defend it. Now here's some points we should emphasize. First of all, we must emphasize the fact that science is not about ethics. Science is morally neutral. Science is about describing. Ethics is about prescribing. Since their functions are totally different, we cannot expect science to generate its own ethics. Now, ethics will require scientific understanding of the procedures being in question, but mere understanding of the nature of the procedures does not in itself generate an automatic ethical decision. It's the worldview that controls the use of scientific knowledge and technology. Secondly, the ability to do something does not automatically equal the permission to do it. Thirdly, today's option may become tomorrow's obligation. There was a time when each one of you 100 years ago, maybe 150 years ago, to get to school would not have had the option of taking an internal combustion form of transportation. You're not going to get here you're going to use a horse-drawn carriage. Once that option became available, it became so popular and so powerful that now it's an obligation, and most of my students have taken some form of internal combustion transportation to get to the class. An interest is different than a right. So we have four main points there. The moral neutrality of science, ability does not automatically equal permission. Today's option may become tomorrow's obligation, so be careful what you consider as an option today. And finally, an interest is different than a right. Do I have an interest in a life that is free from serious distress and disease? Of course. Do I have a right to a life that is free from serious distress and disease? That's a different question. When we collapse the distinction between interests and rights, we will think that we have the right to all things that technology can provide us, even if it violates basic ethic principles. Some more points to emphasize. New power is always accompanied by new duties. It is incumbent, we are responsible as Christians to determine what the new duties will be based upon the new power. Now that means we can't afford to have our heads stuck in the ground, and it also means we probably are going to want to be involved ourselves in some of those important discoveries and inventions so that we can have a guiding influence. That means some of you are going to be called, and some Christians are going to be called to become great geneticists. New power is always accompanied by new duties. Biomedical ethics should not be playing catch-up with technology. And this is one of the roles of science fiction is to try to solve some of the ethical dilemma before they even are invented. We need to hold on to an ontological definition of person. A person, you function as a person because you first of all are a person. You have the natural inherent capacity to give rise to human functions. It's the capacity that is the basis for your worth, scientifically speaking. And to emphasize present function will put a lot of non-functioners at risk. Some goals that we should consider with regards to these technological challenges. First of all, Christians should be acting to liberate the positive effects of technology. If all Christians were against organ transplants, how many people would not have benefited from organ transplants? But instead, Christians understood we're not transplanting a soul here, we're transplanting a physical pumping thing called the heart. And so we liberated the positive effects of technology. Secondly, we need to restrain the negative effects by controlling the abuse potential. Christians will necessarily be responsible for determining appropriate limits. Dialogue and influence must be used by Christians to be in a place where they're not simply taking orders because they've been locked out of the decision-making process. So if you're tired of feeling like the little boy with his nose pressed against the department store window and not able to get what's in there, or you're looking in from the outside, then it's time to recognize that it's our responsibility to occupy till he comes. Christians should be in leadership positions like Francis Collins, who actually was the leader of the United States government Human Genome Project. And he's definitely an evangelical Christian. I don't agree with his conclusions about evolution, by the way, but he's an evangelical Christian, and he was the head of the Human Genome Project that deciphered the human genetic code. Or Leon Kass, a strong religious believer in Judaism who found himself placed in such a strong position even in, I think it was one of the Bush administration's biotechnology advisor. You need to become so excellent at your field that your talent and commitment can promote you to a leadership position. In other words, Christians have to labor to earn the credentials to be worthy of being paid attention to. It's time for the Christians to stop merely standing on the outside and shouting through the glass wall. Christians need to find ways to be embedded in the types of organizations that will make those sorts of differences. And everywhere you can, you must be active, and you must do the homework so you know what you're talking about. May the Lord help us.